Welcome to everyone for our 18th Coffee with EMBL session. And this is another exciting opportunity to bring the community together. We've got another great lineup of participants and speakers, and thanks to everyone for joining. Just very, very briefly before we start, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So please contribute your thoughts in the chat. Raise your hand if you have questions or would like to contribute, and we'll do our best to monitor that and try to bring in everybody who wants to contribute and join in what I think is going to be an exciting and stimulating debate. So, as usual, we have participants to lead the discussion. I think they'll be well known to most of you. We have Mathias Mann, who is a research director and group leader at the Novo Nordisk Foundation Center for Protein Research in Denmark, and also a Max Planck director in proteomics and signal transduction in München in Germany. Alexander Stark, senior scientist at the IMP in Austria. And we all send our best wishes and commiserations to Alex, who has experienced lockdown once again. But we've spoken enough at previous Coffee with EMBLs about lockdown. That's not going to be the topic, we hope, of today's discussion. We have Jennifer McDowall, who many of you will remember from previous Coffee with EMBL sessions, formerly at the EBI, and now working with Mills and Reeve. Jennifer, in the UK, Jennifer is a lawyer, and that's one of the other interesting things we want to discuss that Jennifer can help lead off is the impact of our changing environment and society thanks to AI and how that affects the law. And last but by no means least, we have Ollie Stegle, who's working in the DKFZ in Heidelberg, but is also an associate group leader at EMBL and formerly was a group leader at the EBI in Hingston. So the theme today continues our ongoing discussions about the impact of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and how this is transforming research, society, healthcare, and the law. And that's such a rich field. It opens up so many important things that we can all learn about and think about. One of the questions leading into the first part of this that we've been discussing recently is the idea of not just liability, which we'll come back to, but also responsibility for creating novel ideas. And as we move from a situation where it was almost inconceivable that anything other than a human could originate a novel idea, now maybe we have to rethink that. And so one of the fun things we wanted you to comment on and perhaps contribute your vote or your thought about is, do you think that AlphaFold is a candidate for a Nobel Prize? So I don't think the Nobel Foundation imagined that it would be possible to offer Nobel Prizes to algorithms or computers. Maybe we have to rethink that. So it'll be really interesting to find out what you think about that. The whole idea of whether you should give full credit to artificial intelligence has recently been highlighted by a case that is going through the legal system. And perhaps I could ask Jennifer to tell us about this fascinating case that's ongoing at the moment.
Yes, certainly. So the case involves Stephen Thaler, and it's, if you want to look it up, it's Stephen Thaler versus the Comptroller General. Thaler developed a machine learning algorithm called DABUS, which stands for the Device for the Autonomous Bootstrapping of Unified Sentience. And what he was trying to do here was to challenge whether patent law will permit artificial intelligence to be an inventor on patents. And he got DABUS to develop 2 patents. The patents themselves weren't of particular significance. One was for a type of food container. The other was for a flashing light. But on both patent applications, he put Davis as the inventor and himself as the applicant. Now, in the UK, at least, the Patent Act says that the inventor must be a person. So he was challenging that. And really, Thaler was asking two questions. He said, should the inventorship be confined to just natural persons, or should they include things, whatever that thing is, that's capable of invention, such as AI? And the second point he wanted to make was, is the owner of the thing capable of the invention, should they have the right to apply for a patent? Well, when he applied for the two patents, unsurprisingly, the UK Intellectual Property Office came back to say, no, the patents both failed because he didn't identify a real person as the inventor. He then took it to the High Court, which he lost, and then most recently he took it on to the Court of Appeal. And in the Court of Appeal, they again came back to say that the inventor had to be a natural person because this is what was in the patent law and it was Parliament's intention. Although one of the three judges did take a different view. Justice Burse agreed that the machines were not persons. However, he concluded that the law did not demand that the inventor be a person, but because the other two judges ruled that the inventor did have to be a person, he was overruled on that.
Jennifer, could I just ask you very quickly, just to help me out and perhaps anyone else, could you just very briefly remind us about what the original concept of invention is? That what is patentable?
So for it to be patentable, it has to be an actual invention as opposed to just an idea. So things like mathematics can't really be patented. So it has to have, there must be an inventive step. And there's a series of criteria within the patent law that it's got to make. One of them being it has to be novel. So it can't already have been described in the public literature. It has to be, it can't be obvious. So someone's tried it on one set of criteria, and then it's very obvious to try a different set. So there's a whole series of criteria it's got to pass to be patentable. But here, the only thing that they were challenging, because what they were patenting, the food container, it was patentable. The only thing that he was challenging was that there was no human being as an inventor. And the court said it does have to be an inventor. And that brought up a lot of serious questions. It's now going to the Supreme Court, so we hear what the Supreme Court has to say. But the problems that the judges are facing is that in the Patent Act, it says that the inventor, it refers to it as persons. So they can't necessarily get around that without an amendment to the law. And right now, the UK intellectual property law is asking people for their views. So they could be looking at a possible change in law, because the problems that you're facing right now, the unanswered questions, is if it's partly AI and partly human that invented something, fine, you could probably have the human on the patent. But if something is truly 100% developed by AI, as the law stands right now, their name can't go on as the inventor, and a human being isn't, or the owner of the AI is not permitted to step in to be in place of the AI. That was also ruled at the Court of Appeal. And therefore, in effect, if it's an invention that's entirely determined by AI, then it's not patentable at the moment because there's no human person who invented it.
So I think that's something that, sorry to come in, I think that's something we definitely want to follow up on and explore as this session goes on. The idea that you that this ruling could be so profound in its impact, because if you exclude AI to actually be an inventor, maybe you're taking away the ability or willingness for people to compete using the tools that AI provide. If you actually feel it's going to risk your ability to intellectually protect your discoveries.
Yes, I mean, certainly if you take something like pharmaceuticals, if AI was the sole inventor on a new drug, if they then just put a person as the name as the inventor anyway, then somebody else could challenge, if they really didn't have a part to play in the invention, then that patent could be challenged. And if they're found not to be the true inventor, it could fall. And at the moment, that has a very chilling effect on AI, because would you want to have AI design your drug if that then renders it unpatentable? Yeah. Or let's say that AI develops a brand new alloy that's perfect for motor vehicles. It hasn't been invented before, but you can't patent it because AI isn't the inventor.
Yes, can I just let Jonathan, you raised your hand. Would you like...
So I actually had a couple questions to try to clarify. Did the AI actually itself identify the need for this container, or was there a person behind kind of directing AI to design a novel container?
I don't know the circumstances behind it, but when the judge said, well, can we put you, Thaler, as the inventor, which would have resolved the problem, he said no. So the point of the litigation is to push it in the extreme by saying, I have nothing to do with this invention at all. How are you going to react in the law?
And also for an invention, doesn't the inventor also have to reduce the invention idea to a product, or actually show that it can be carried out? I can't think of quite the right words, but I know.
I mean, there does have to, yes. So there has to be an inventive step, but the inventor doesn't have to write the patent. All that can be done for the inventor. It's more what this was trying to do. So there's obviously a really gray area where something isn't necessarily 100% produced by AI. It's probably going to be, in most cases, a mixture of people and AI. But what Thaler was trying to do is say, what if AI is solely responsible for AI invention and it is patentable? How are we going to treat it? And he was pushing it in that direction to the extreme, basically, because it's a question that needs to be answered, because right now it's not possible in the UK law. So the question was also asked in the US, and it was failed in the US. But they said, yes, AI could be the inventor in Australia and South Africa. So it just depends on the actual law and how it's been written.
Okay, so that's sort of a couple of great points there that we need to follow up on. I just see there's a few people raising there. So Ollie, you were first that I saw. Would you like to comment?
I mean, it's a really fascinating discussion, and thanks for bringing this example here. And I was wondering, where basically the intellectual ownership and innovation sort of starts, and where basically the AI as a tool ends. I mean, the main use cases we have right now for this, right, it's a tool. It might be a more powerful tool than previous ones, and to some extent, in some cases, this tool may also take autonomous decisions, which is probably a bit different than previous tools. It's not quite the hammer and the nail, but it's also not an autonomous agent that decides one day, I'm going to research containers and do that. So where basically, what is the necessary element by this court ruling in terms of also deciding that this is an area to pursue versus it being a tool? I mean, the purpose of the interrogation in intellectual property is very interesting. Whether there's any ruling in that.
So the question here is, who is the inventor? So you can have an inventor and you can have an applicant. And the applicant doesn't have to be a natural person. It can be a company, for instance, where the company and the inventor can be the employees. But the inventor, according to UK law, has to be a person. Now, if the person says, well, I only use the AI as a tool and I'm the true inventor behind it, then they would put their name on the patent. But Thaler raised almost more of a hypothetical question. What if I had nothing to do with it? And what if the AI invented it entirely by themselves? What if even the owner dies off and the AI system continues to be used and is more or less independent of human input?
Yeah,
do you think so? So it's very theoretical.
Yeah, but it's actually fantastically prescient of what happens when technology has this massive shift, when suddenly things become possible that previously were unimaginable. So today, the idea that you have a lot of property law that maybe was written when it wasn't imaginable that flying machines existed, where you could fly over the top of someone else's property. So you completely have a different concept of what the property involves. Do you own the property above? Do you own the sky above your property? How far up? When technology changes like this. And we'll bring in Alex in just a second. I see he's got his hand up. But this issue about the role of artificial intelligence, even if it's working in your group, I wonder how similar you think that is to, let's say, someone like myself who maybe has a co-worker or a young student, and I shamelessly exploit them, and they come up with a brilliant idea that I'm not even capable of understanding, but we want to patent it. And then, of course, I want to share the credit or to be involved in this. So presumably, the student can be named on the patent, or maybe I should be kicked off the patent, quite rightly, because I'm just stealing their achievements. But in a way, isn't that what the AI is doing? Isn't that like just a thought there.
You can have more than one inventor. You don't have to have one inventor. And in realistic circumstances, you'd probably have a human and an AI. But to challenge the law, more looking towards the future, he wanted to put forward a case where it was very intractable and said, I have nothing to do with this invention.
Sure.
How are you going to legislate?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think it's a fascinating thing that will become more and more of a problem. And it just seems as a non-lawyer, non-legal person, the idea that the law has a sentence that uses the word person probably predates any conceptual idea that it could have been anything other than, rather than trying to exclude a computer, it wasn't written by judges or lawyers. But anyway, sorry, Alex, you've got your hand up. Please come and make your point.
Yeah, my thoughts are very similar to Oliver's. So, whether this is a purely hypothetical kind of thought experiment where a lawyer wanted to kind of push the legal system and bring this really to kind of an extreme binary decision point on whether or not an AI machine can be an inventor, or whether this is any more practical implications. Because there I'm with Oliver. To me, AI so far at least is often more a tool than a person with its own objectives and goals. So I think at least at this very moment, if an AI is more a tool that a person employs towards a certain objective, then the person who employs and uses the tool, no matter what the tool is and no matter how kind of artificially intelligent that tool is, would, in my opinion, still currently remain the inventor. But I like the analogy that Angus brought up with co-workers, because, of course, often we are relying on co-workers towards certain achievements, and then they become, of course, inventors.
Yeah, I blame myself here, not anyone else on this distinguished group. So.
A similar legal problem that might be more acute but I have actually not really looked into how this would be handled in the different states around the world, is responsibility and liability in car accidents if at some point we have fully autonomous cars. Do you know how that is handled?
AI.
That's a great topic. Just before we, let's move to that in just one second. I just wanted to bring in Chris Sander, who I see there's been a great discussion going on in the chat, and Chris is always a great contributor to these things, and clearly has strong opinions on the idea of whether, I think Chris maybe is outraged at the idea that AI could be an inventor rather than the assistant to brilliant computer scientists. Chris.
Well, I'll make two brief comments. One of them, first of all, I think the question of Nobel Prizes is overrated. Science should not be motivated by getting prizes. Even the competition for seeing who could get the best protein structure, called CASP, organized by a friend of mine, is great. But it was a competition that was created to create losers, basically, because most people are losers. Could you
remind us what CASP is? Not everyone.
Yeah, no, maybe it was a competition where people solved protein structures, hid them under the table, would then give the sequence to the community. The community would make predictions, and then the curtain was opened and the structure was shown, and people were then given prizes, like somebody commented on Zhang, always often ranked very highly, and so on. And for years and years, they worked on this, and they always spent a lot of time comparing each other, and most of the people lost because they weren't top ranked. And people who won, they said that they somehow should be awarded a grant or something. I think this is quite useful in a technical sense, but the wrong goal. The goal was to solve the problem. And some people that came from the outside and solved the problem, several people in a series of that we discussed some weeks ago, not to repeat that. So I think that as well as prizes, I think, shouldn't primarily motivate science. Science should be motivated, I think, by solving the problem. Second comment on the making a contribution to the world, right? Second, on the AI as an inventor, I think it's an interesting technical discussion. But as Matthias also said in the comments, in the U.S., corporations were classified as people, but that was tempted to say, a right wing or whatever the word is, aim to actually use the right that human beings have for free speech and apply them to corporations. So corporations could basically spend huge amounts of money to control politics. Wrong question, wrong mechanism. In the same sense, I think that AI as inventor, it's an interesting technical question, but the key thing is to what extent human beings control AI. The AI, I think, that we're talking about here in terms of the question that was brought up, which is interesting, but I think that was just a piece of software running. The question is whether AI machines, thinking robots, can become independent, write their own software, control their own replication, invent new kinds of algorithms, and then take over in some sense from humanity. That's a real issue that's worth discussing, and there are lots of books about that. But not whether or not somebody can be classified as an inventor. I think it's an interesting starting point, but it's the wrong question.
Okay, great. I mean, we may well follow up on that. There's obviously a lot of different opinions. I mean, I think I completely agree with you, Chris, on the idea that I like to see science as a community activity rather than a sporting competition. But there's no doubt that there are a lot of people motivated by a more competitive approach to doing this, and a lot of popular views about this. But I think we're looking forward, and Jennifer's doing a fantastic job of generating. Jennifer, you generate some of the most controversy and discussion.
That's a discussion. That's good.
I think one thing to keep in mind is that the patent case was not simply a theoretical what if. It's a case that people will challenge patents and they will try to break patents. If you have a blockbuster drug, people will try to break it. And if it's known that AI invented it, but there's a human name on there, it will be challenged on the basis that AI isn't allowed to be the inventor. And the problem that has is it could be a chilling effect on something like the pharmaceutical, where will they chance to have AI if it's going to be render it unpatentable or challengeable, and they'll lose the patent after putting millions in. It could have realistically a chilling effect on industry.
Yeah,
that's part of the problem.
Absolutely. Thomas, you were the next, and then Ollie.
Yeah. So I just wanted to report that there's a lot of discussion in the chat, and it seems like the scientists are overwhelmingly for AI is some sort of a tool. But I think to play the devil's advocate and back a little bit, Jennifer, I think this is actually a contention case that underlies a number of these future scenarios. Because I mean, as we were discussing also when we were preparing this coffee with EMBL, the legislation usually follows these legal cases. So I mean, the shape of the legislation, will AI, be responsible, and in which way for whatever calculation a Tesla makes, will be inspired also by these cases, because nobody has a sort of reference point. So I think it will, this is a very, very interesting conversation in that sense, because if the AI has a responsibility, then the AI has probably rights, and then it becomes very difficult to discount it and not consider it an inventor or a prize-bearing entity or winning entity. Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, perfect. Ollie.
Just one quick comment. I think actually it might not have it's interesting this dimension that might have a chilling effect on pharmaceutical industry. I think it might have a very positive effect, namely that we really make the differentiation, which we at the moment don't do, between one part of AI that essentially captures patterns and is a tool to capture complex relationships and has no autonomy whatsoever. And frankly, that's the part of AI that we use in science. That's what AlphaFold does, so that's what all the other things are doing. Versus the other part of AI that actually has autonomy. And if you can show that the AI you use doesn't make any autonomous decisions, then I think it's clearly on safe grounds. And I think the interesting question is when you get to this regime where you do autonomy. And I think pharmaceutical industry does that now also to some extent. And this is where it really gets interesting. Where, for example, the output of such algorithms drive the next step, the next experiments. And these loops are not happening. You generate data, you do your pattern magic, but then you also inform the next experiments. And this is where the autonomy comes in. And then it becomes very interesting. Is it autonomous if a human controls and says, yes, we're going to do this experiment, but not this one? Or is it already that the AI proposes the next experiment, experimental design, then taking over some of the innovation? I think I would just want to throw in this idea, this discussion about when is an algorithm autonomous? And I guess autonomy is the key prerequisite to create intellectual property in this case. Yeah, maybe there's another dimension.
Yeah. So we'll absolutely come to that point, which is a fascinating one. Just in relation to the chilling nature of this legal judgment that Jennifer really opened my eyes to is just think about this scenario, though, because Jennifer, I think I'm right that you said that while a judgment was reached in some jurisdictions, the US and I think the UK, the AI couldn't be an inventor. There were other jurisdictions that came to a different opinion.
That's right, Australia and South Africa.
Australia and South Africa. So we've seen situations previously, for example, where different jurisdictions, different legal systems might take a different view about other things like ethical issues, like perhaps using stem cells from embryos or something like that. And that doesn't allow certain types of research to be done in certain areas. If you have a similar situation with respect to AI, and it's felt that if you even use AI as part of the drug discovery process, you could jeopardize the patentability of something. Maybe the pharma companies want to move out of the US and go to only work in Australia or South Africa or something. Is that a possibility?
I mean, I think you have to look at it's not where it's invented, it's patenting. So they would look globally at where they can get something patented. So if they could get it a drug patented at just Australia and South Africa, even if they developed the drug in Australia, they'd still want a patent in the US and UK and EU. And they would run up against problems if it was AI. So it wouldn't resolve their problems by moving to a different place. Which is why it's a decision I think that needs to be addressed just to make sure there is no chilling effect.
Okay, Alex, you've got your hand up.
I had just a quick questions for clarification. So, do you know by any chance what considerations went into these distinct decisions? Because I mean, we now witness, right, all over the world in this COVID crisis, how politicians can come to very different decisions. And that often depends on whether they are completely in their lawyer's bubble or in their scientist bubble. Or so I was wondering if the reason for coming to distinct decisions about whether or not AI can be an inventor purely stems from different considerations that are either taken or not taken by the different courts.
I haven't looked at the judgments in Australia and South Africa, but it's probably going to be the way that the law is drafted. And the way it's drafted in the UK, the Patents Act of 1977, talks about persons when it refers to inventors, and that's what they can't get around. If it doesn't do that, it can be, yes, yes, yeah.
So another side of the coin, Jennifer, that comes here when we're talking about can we give credit to the AI? There are some people, maybe I don't know if Chris is in this category or not, but there are some people who, okay, you don't want to give the AI credit, but you want to hold it responsible if it screws up. So let's get back to the self-driving cars, which I think are absolutely on their way. In fact, if you watch YouTube videos, you'll see they're already here to some extent, and increasingly autonomy of transport will take over because my opinion is it will become not infallible but safer than humans, and then I think a lot of people are going to want to sue somebody if an autonomous car crashes into their car or knocks over their grandmother or causes an accident. How do we decide this? Are we being schizophrenic and saying you can't give credit to AI for inventing things, but we're going to hold it responsible for screwing up and causing damage?
I don't think that's so much of an issue right now, because if an employee designs a car and the car is found to be faulty, it's the manufacturer. So let's say, a big car manufacturer, let's say Tesla, develops a car and one of its engineers designs something and it's found to be faulty. It's not the engineer who's going to be liable, it's going to be Tesla. So if the designer is AI, it's not so much whether AI can be taken as a person that can be responsible. It's still going to be the company that produced it, because in that effect, AI is like an employee. So,
okay, but if it was like an employee, it would be allowed to be put on a patent.
No, because you have to look at the patent law, and the patent law stipulates a person. So, I mean, another issue, probably more relevant to that question, is what happens when AI can own a company.
But it's interesting what
that is something that might happen.
Yeah. But what you just said there, Jennifer, but please, again, people contribute to this because I know that there are all these opinions there, but when we were talking about the machinery or Tesla or the company being sued, usually I associate that in my mind if VW or Toyota or someone supply a car that has a defective component, and the brake doesn't work. So the person driving the car pushes the brake pedal and it doesn't stop the car. The company is liable and not the engineer who assembled the car. But isn't it a bit different if actually the car has an AI system that's making I was in danger of saying a conscious decision, which I guess is, I'm not sure that's the right one, but the car makes a decision to turn right and not left. And there's like a decision-making algorithmic process? That seems in my mind to be very different from a brake that doesn't work.
No, because let's say you have a bus company and the bus driver makes the decision not to stop on a red light and there's an accident. Yes, the bus driver can have criminal charges for running the red light, but the company still holds responsibility for its employees.
Okay.
So again, the AI is like an employee.
Interesting, but not as the owner of the car, but wouldn't that then be not the bus company, but VW or Mercedes who sold them the bus?
Not if it's the driver who, if you have a bus company and the driver makes a mistake and there's no fault with the actual bus, it's the bus company.
Okay.
And it's the employer. But what's interesting here is what happens when AI becomes, can own companies, can be company.
Yeah.
If that happens, which it might, not now, but what happens?
Yeah.
If the AI owns some company.
This is clearly a rabbit hole that that is, I think, it's fascinating for a lot of us who are less familiar with the law. Matthias, can I bring you in at this point? So you're someone who, most of the people here will know of leading, hugely successful basic research group. I know that you are engaging in using AI in your own research to achieve outcomes, I believe, that weren't possible before. Could you perhaps share your thoughts on how you see AI changing the research world in your sphere?
I'm happy to do that. I'm a bit afraid that I'm bringing down the discussion from these lofty heights to very practical things. So, we also written a review about AI in our field, which is proteomics and for biomarker discovery, and it strikes me that indeed AI and artificial intelligence or machine learning and deep learning, and increasingly deep learning, is getting a foothold in many parts of data generation also. So I would even quickly share a slide here.
Maybe when you get time, Matthias, you could put a link to your review in the chat. That would also be, I think, good for people.
Yeah, so I just want to, not to tout our own research, but just, this is what we're doing here. This is just to illustrate in this context, like how much machine learning and AI has come into the picture. So this is about precision oncology. So you start, so what the pathologist had or still has in many cases is this slice here, and then they make a treatment decision for your cancer. So this will be this, right? So this will be the slide, and then they make a decision what they look at it in magnification, and they tell you what drug and so on. That there was until very recently. And what we are doing here is also, or up to here, it's actually what this whole field of digital pathology is doing. So now, what the pathologist did famously, it can in some cases be done just as well by an AI. So that's all deep learning, couldn't have been done before deep learning. But now we move on and we tell it to cut out the specific cells that we're interested in, right? And so that's machine learning twice, so deep learning for outlining the cells and also to classify those cells, which ones do you want, and what could be interesting. It can do this by itself. So either it can teach it or it can do it by itself. And then this is our specialty, is this mass spectrometry, and don't want to bore you with it. But I can also tell you that we now can increasingly say for every peptide we've identified and quantified, we can go back and say what where should it have been in this multidimensional space where we all these different things we measure about these peptides. We now have deep learning models for all these axes that tell us with that sequence it should have been here, right? And then we can look where it actually was, and then it's more or less likely. So the larger point here at that point is that more and more when you do physical experiments, you also build up what some people call the omniverse. So you have your experiment, you can sort of replicate it in the omniverse, and then you can compare whether this could even be. So that's in our particular case, but it comes in many cases. And then next thing is here, and that's a bit more traditional. So when you have all this information, you have to put it together with what's already known. So that's done by so-called graph databases, and they are deep learning, and it's just beginning to be applied. So the graph databases and graph algorithms, that's very powerful already. But now the next level will be that AI is directly being used on this in machine learning. And then you come out with something where you tell the doctor, right? And just also to give you a visual here. So this unassuming slide here, this just after the AI, it becomes all these different cell types, and we now have the molecular composition of all these cell types. So all these things, in some ways they were precursors of this for a long time, but it's now all coming together, and it's a totally different world, for instance, in precision oncology. So, and I think it will go for a lot of things in biology and in other fields, that you have this omniverse where your data have a separate existence, and you can see whether this could even have been what you have measured.
So how do you see this? So obviously this is super exciting and amazing watching this happen. I guess you would be saying that the AI is opening up a new vista for possibilities and ideas. How do you see this developing over the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, where do you think we can get to, or you can get to?
Yeah. So I'm pretty techno-optimistic, I have to say. And I also remember that I told my students 20 years ago, right? Like, when you're finished, nobody will be pipetting anymore, right? Because robots will do this. But this actually didn't happen, and it's still not the case. It's still, I don't know why, but people basically pipette in the lab, biologists, the way they did when we were at EMBL. But I think this is also coming to an end at some point. So what I see, not directly a revolution, but an exponential increase, like we see in other fields like energy and so on, and food. We see this exponential increase, and this is happening in our lab work as well. So it's imperceptible, like year to year, but it's definitely coming, and I think it's accelerating.
So do you have any concerns, Matthias, listening to the discussions we had earlier and Jennifer's legal perspective on this, that just like Elon Musk will be sued by everyone who is knocked over by a self-driving car, that someone who is misdiagnosed in the future with having or not having cancer, who should have got a therapy, will come and try and sue you because
yes,
technology.
Yeah, I mean, then when I was just describing like the data that we generate in the lab, and there's sort of this digital twin to this experiment, and we can see how the two agree. So that's kind of new. So then in the field of biomarker patterns, and when you want to use this for actually deciding about patients' fate, and then it's of course a huge issue. So this brings up the whole field of explainable AI. I think there's even EU regulations that you have to make it explainable. You cannot, just like in employment, you cannot use in the EU an AI that could be very good at predicting this employee will be good for my company and this will not. But if it's not explainable, then you cannot use it. And that's for good reason, because the AI may have just learned some racial stereotypes, for instance. And the same thing goes in making treatment decisions. So I think it goes both ways, because you can be too fast with the AI, and you can apply it and you make mistakes. But just like with the self-driving, right? I think the bigger danger I see actually is that we have outdated regulation, and we, because even if Tesla, for instance, is 10 times more safe than a human, which it actually is on autopilot right now, just still 10%, that's a lot of lawsuits against Tesla, and same for the doctors, right? So I actually worry more about regulation holding these things back than they are moving unchecked. Of course, there has to be a balance, and that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think, and just please comment in the chat, and we'll follow this up. Ollie, can I bring you in again at this point, if you're available? Because I know that in your own area, you've also been looking at how AI can transform healthcare and contribute to the future of clinical medicine and the health of the nation.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, I try to connect it to the outline that Matthias has been given, and I think it's a really fascinating starting point to think about the pathology and how you analyzing tissues, and then profile those tissues using high throughput technologies from omics to proteomics and so forth. So the other angle that I would like to throw into the mix is understanding our genome and the DNA. So this is a bit closer to what we're doing, and I think that complementary fits very nicely to what we just heard from Matthias. So we are working on essentially algorithms that are able to read genomic variation, that are able, if you wish, to translate genetic changes in our DNA that might either be variation we inherit from our parents or variation that occurs in the context, for example, of cancer, to stay here on topic, into functional outputs, that we can really make predictions about what happens without measuring them. And that's really fantastic. Historically, we want to measure everything in every sample. And often the reason why we do all these measurements from RNA to proteome to epigenome and so forth is to understand what's the functional consequence of a particular aberration that we see in a tumor. And here AI increasingly allows us to basically interpolate these changes. So we don't have to measure everything in everyone, but rather we have machines that we can train on big data sets and then go in on a patient on our N=1 sample and annotate every single nucleotide polymorphism change and understand, does this cause a regulatory change? Does it cause a splicing change? Does it cause a post-transcriptional change? And I think this is obviously phenomenal because you can really enrich and interpreting how DNA variation affects phenotype and really sort of bring value to this chain. So I think that's the other angle, the other side to it. And these two pictures, the sort of genome-centric view, and then I would now maybe refer it as tissue or pathology-centric view, they coincide and come together and then can really make much more, the starting points of personalized predictions for allowing for then also interventions and therapy.
So, one interesting thing is I often find that when I discuss these opportunities with colleagues and brilliant people like yourself and Matthias and others here, I just get so excited about the possibility of doing good and helping society. But I've also noticed that you get a completely different response when you try to discuss these issues, sometimes with people who are further away from being scientists themselves and who immediately focus on a more Machiavellian fear of government. I mean, in a situation when many of our fellow citizens across the countries won't even accept vaccination to protect their own health, let alone help the rest of society, there's this immediate pushback and fear about government and somehow the state controlling their lives. Is there an opportunity that AI will be seen as an agent of a more right-wing or corporate institution that wants to take this information you derive, Ollie or Matthias, I'm interested in both your views, and use it to deny healthcare because you're saying, actually, here's yet more data that we're going to associate with an AI model that says you're more at risk of getting cancer or developing heart disease, so we don't want to give you health insurance.
So can I?
Yeah, please, Matthias.
Yeah, so that's exactly, that's a very valid concern. And that's why we have all those regulations, right? Like the GDPR and so on. We have them quite extreme in Europe. So again, it's that balance, right? So the danger in saying, okay, let's not get so much information is that then the health system, you're not using all the information that you could use to help this particular patient, or you could learn more about the disease. So it's not an answer to say, when you say this at dinner, I imagine, then maybe somebody says that this is all creepy and we shouldn't do it. But I think the answer is, of course, it has to be regulated, and and there's a lot of exciting research in federated learning and encrypting and blockchain and what have you. But we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater and just do medicine in the old way, right? Where we just measure cholesterol is up and down, and then off you go, right?
Yeah, I agree with you, Matthias. Yeah, but Ollie, what do you think? Are you an agent of undermining healthcare or of promoting it?
I think this is important. I mean, Matthias already made very good points. It's important to sort of disentangle the issue, because I think there are two of them at the very least. One of them is how to deal with data, and that's obviously a slightly different but connected issue to then how you interpret the data. And I think what the general public's most worried about is what is done with that data, and to a lesser extent, but perhaps as well how they interpret it. And I think AI is sort of a blessing and a cure at the same time, or it comes both sides. On the one hand, we can actually solve some of the problems related to privacy using better approaches. But on the other hand, it is obviously important that the more data will be, logically combinable or mineable by these approaches, the more powerful these machines will be. So they will inevitably, these advances will show that there's a balancing act between privacy and fostering advances. And these algorithms obviously show us very vividly that by combining big data sets, we can create these advances. And then society will have to come with a balancing decision, whether we want to maximize information gain or whether we want to maximize privacy. And that will always be, a balancing exercise we have to take on. And GDPR is certainly allowing every subject to ever withdraw at any point in time their data and their consent to contribute to these elements. But I would also say that, just closing our eyes is not a solution. It's a bit like, we don't want data to be used, so we use the same data, we just do it with one eye rather than two. And, there's no going back. It's once you know how to see, then you want to see. And, you maybe want to regulate the intent, what you do with that information, but you don't want to blur the information itself. And I think that's a very important differentiation where societies have to come also with maybe coming back to law, restrictions, what you actually can do with the insights. I'm very shocked in some ways that governments don't regulate, for example, what can be done with genomic information, and that it can't go into healthcare insurances. We have a unisex law for health insurances, which is a European legislation, that men and women have to pay the same health insurance premium, which is also the genome. It's how many X chromosomes you have. It's a pretty big predictor for health insurance. But we don't have any other law that says, other genetic variation cannot be used. And at least not directly, as far as I know. I would like to pass on to our legal colleague here in this context. So I think we should regulate the intent and not the tools. I think that's the message.
I think that's a really excellent point. And if I could just build on that to say, I think that's one of the reasons that's inspired the whole team here running these Coffee with EMBL events and aspiring to move on and next year launch a YouTube channel to broaden the discussion, because I think we can't ignore these issues, and our responsibility is to provide factual information to our political masters and to the general public to remove fear of, as far as possible, and misinformation. So I think it is our responsibility to make these arguments clear and easy to understand so that society can take appropriate decisions, and so we don't get bad laws rushed in by people who don't really understand what it's about. But yeah, maybe Jeff, you'd like to comment on that point. I'm not wanting to put you on the spot of defending the legal profession. I think there are some other lawyers here as well who may like to comment on that.
I mean, that is going somewhat outside my field because I am in intellectual property, but yeah, I'm
yeah. Okay. We want to hold you entirely responsible for the entire legal system that goes on. But I think it must be very challenging for the people who make laws to have to cope with such complex technical issues that they simply don't understand. And when you add on to that layers of political pressure driven by social media, it's even more difficult. I think I saw Rolf Abweiler also here. I don't know if Rolf's still here. Are you still around, Rolf? If he is, maybe Rolf would like to comment as well, because Rolf in his leadership role in the EBI must have to deal with the political pressure of managing large, complex data sets. I wonder if Rolf wants to make any comment about that. Okay, I'm not sure. Okay.
You just left.
He just left. Okay, he must have realized I was going to put him on the spot. Alex, perhaps I could bring you in then, if not to represent the entire field of science. How do you see this interface between developing changing technology and the impact of AI and making society aware of what's possible so that laws can adapt to this changing situation?
Yeah, I think I have a very similar opinion than that Oliver just explained, where scientists create knowledge and insight and, of course, tools. But then it's up to the society to decide, for example, whether we want to live in a society that exploits this knowledge to create differences between people and their health insurance premiums, or whether they want to very selectively use this knowledge to, for example, heal patients and treat disease, but not to put people at a disadvantage just because they carry a slightly greater genetic risk for certain diseases or not. So I think there I would very clearly separate knowledge generation from the societal impact and how a society as a whole wants to use this knowledge and the tools that can be built with the knowledge. And it's, of course, up to the interface between the scientists that might have the technical and scientific knowledge and the rest of the society to also then discuss and develop these visions of where this could go, where this could take us in all aspects, right? I mean, AI has not only aspects on how well we can treat disease or predict disease from genetic and data, but also, of course, as Matthias explained, from proteomics data that we can derive from patient samples. But it will also impact how we all work in the future. Matthias mentioned the pipetting, and he's kind of disappointed that we still have to pipette. But philosophers do think about this. There is a German philosopher, I don't know if he published in English too, but this Richard David Precht, he thinks a lot about how AI will change our working life and which jobs will become obsolete in the near future, maybe. And he thinks that this will have a greater impact on society than the Industrial Revolution had, almost a century ago.
Yeah, Thomas, I see you've raised your hand. Perhaps, also, Thomas, you could comment on some of these things in the chat. I think Sandra just made an excellent point that needs a discussion as well.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to ask a question to Alex, because I went through one of his last preprints, and I was kind of I was kind of struck by the fact of, as maybe people know, Alex works a lot in understanding the transcription and transcriptional elements. And so, in one of your last papers, you were suggesting that the AI somewhat is not only a better predictor of, the transcriptional landscape of this, but could actually predict new patterns and new ways to build artificial elements. So I wanted to sort of go back a little bit on this point of whether AI is just a tool, which seems to be a little bit of the majority opinion of the scientists, or could provide something new that we couldn't really dream of or think of.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for this question. I feel much more comfortable and excited to talk about my science or our science. And that is topic-wise very similar to what Oliver just said. We are also looking at the genetics, the DNA of our genomes, and try to understand the regulatory elements that are encoded within our genomes, right? The little, stretches of sequence that are responsible for when and where different parts of the genomes are activated or not activated, expressed as we call it or not. We've been working on this since more than a decade now. Since I moved to Vienna, I put my entire lab's focus behind this question. And what for me, AI now allows us to do that wasn't really possible just a few years ago, is that we don't have to approach this problem with our preconceived ideas on how this information might be encoded. Right? So we knew, of course, before that these elements contain very short DNA words that we call motifs, and that it must be somehow the presence and maybe the arrangement of these motifs. But it was always the scientists' preconception and prior knowledge that we would then just probe, right? Kind of in a one-by-one fashion. And exactly as Oliver said before, we are using AI only as a tool. I wouldn't, go as far as saying that the AI that we use, this deep learning methods, go beyond just being tools in our hands, but they allow us to discover more complex patterns, even patterns that we could not have necessarily thought of, and thereby also then allow us to construct novel sequences that nature has not evolved, that adhere to these rules, and that thereby function as intended, even though they're not naturally occurring. So this is what we're very excited about. So both understanding sequences, how they have evolved in nature, in our bodies, but also whether we can build artificial sequences that don't occur in nature by the rules we discover, and whether or not these elements then function as intended.
Yeah, which I think was a theme with AlphaFold, right? Maybe even thinking of folds that are not natural or existing. Sorry, Angus, I didn't want to cut in.
No. It's. I mean, all these points are great. I just want to give the chance, conscious of the time, to ask if Sandra from EMBL might like to put this question to Alex, Matthias, and Ollie, which I think was a very interesting one. It follows on directly from what Alex was saying, because that's all great, but what are the data coming in, and are there biases going to be introduced here if we're not careful? Sandra.
Yeah, so I would love to ask the question to the experts here, and one thing is bias related to data, where the data comes from. So we have seen in biomedical research some uses of AI, for instance, in detecting skin cancer, right? The data came only from certain groups of the population, so they couldn't detect skin cancer in people with different origins. But also in the, for instance, Alexander, you just mentioned that you can, with AI, you can actually discover new sequences that are not occurring in nature. So that's, so my question is, so that it doesn't, bias doesn't come in. I mean, AI is actually able, independently of what data you put in your case, to actually come up with something new, because that could be a limitation with AlphaFold, right? Because something that I read, the data that it's fed into the algorithms, into the AI tools, are always based on what we know. But AlphaFold, for instance, is actually also able to come up with something new. So the bias doesn't influence then the results of the.
I mean,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think it is very similar to AlphaFold. So we can only. So I think there is still bias, and of course the rules that we learn, right? Even though these rules are much more complex than the rules that we could previously learn, they are still derived from our training data, right? And therefore the synthetic sequences that we can create, they still are built based on the rules that we extracted from our training data. Right? So this is similar to AlphaFold, learning the protein structures and the rules that how a protein sequence relates to the protein structure from a pre-existing database, and therefore having a much easier time when at least small elements resemble what has already been seen, and having more problems if it was, completely out there. And that's very similar to our problem. We're now working on how well these rules generalize, and what aspects of the rules generalize and what aspects do not generalize, and more importantly, maybe what types of additional information do we need from new systems to adapt the rules without having to necessarily redo the whole experiment in the new system.
Okay, Ollie, would you like to contribute?
I just want to sort of, draw an analogy here, and I think that's also where we are right now and where we will be in the future, and that really fits into what the description Alex has made in his own research. At the moment, these tools, in many ways, simplify or make the process of dealing with method biology easier. Biology has a strong reductionist tendency. We're doing experiments, we try and derive general patterns, and then we draw a diagram, and then it ends up in the next generation of textbooks. And essentially, these patterns that we now can extract from data are more general, and the rules are more subtle. And that's very, very important and also powerful in the concept of biology, because things are messy. We don't have like 3 equations that govern life in the same way that we can do this to some extent. To a greater extent, physics, I would say, completely. And so I think this is how we use this at the moment. And I think what would be very, very exciting to see is when exactly these ideas to create synthetic experiments, to make extrapolation to things that are not real yet, how these take place, but also when the machines can take autonomy, when we derive experiments from it. I think that will be the next step, that we basically connect not just extracting these generalizable rules and then checking them, but essentially sampling the new space autonomously and figuring out where we'll do experiments, to create better, more generalizable rules. And then we're getting also closer to where we started, that things become relevant, that the algorithm actually makes intellectual contribution to some extent. Yeah. So I wanted just to throw in this idea, maybe also a question to my co-panelists. When would these algorithms actually leave the tool area and become scientific agents, if you wish, that are co-inventors? Yeah? And maybe that's an interesting point.
Matthias, as a co-panelist, you had your hand up anyway, so perhaps you could also respond to Ollie.
Yes. So in the machine learning field and deep learning field, this agent is that's of course the reinforcement learning that DeepMind is famous for in the first place. So unlike normal deep learning on images and so on, you have an agent. So you're all aware of these game programs, and then increasingly, the spectacular thing was that these agents needed to know less and less, and they were able to learn all Atari games, and then they were one of them was able to learn chess and Go and what have you in 24 hours, and so that I think that reinforcement learning that's and DeepMind, that's the direction to watch, and they are making a lot of progress actually. So so that's happening to some degree. I wanted to raise something that's similar. So if you remember, there was sort of a big excitement about systems biology, like I would say 10, 15 years ago. And the idea was that, now you could get more data and more molecular data, and then you would have somehow all these differential equations, and somehow you had this the cell in the system of equations, and you could then see what how it makes decisions, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but in my view that hasn't actually worked out that way. So we are getting more and more data, but like what also the panelists have said, these are then applications in relatively narrow areas. So genomic variation, what we have subtle genomic variation, and what does that make us subtly different? we have these subtle elements in the genome, and they can be regulatory or not. But like, if I take the cell as a system, right, I stimulate it and do something, and maybe it becomes a cancer cell or it divides. I mean, that whole thing has not made that much headway in the last 15 years, and I wonder whether that could now be changing. That so we cannot directly model it with differential equations and so on, but maybe it's very similar to how neural nets work in the first place. So maybe we should have another go at it with these methods.
Do you see, Matthias, or anyone here? Please contribute. Do you see a danger that this development, if we're not careful, could spread more of a divide in society between the haves and the have-nots, both within societies and between the developed countries and the less developed ones? If you make high-tech technologies for healthcare available to a limited section of society, and perhaps following up from Sandra's question, that's another way of introducing bias. If only certain types of people get access to being measured by these technologies. What do you think, Matthias?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely a danger. And we have this huge, I mean, novel technology or not, right? We have this huge gradient in, for instance, just life expectancy, right? Like in the UK and other places too. We have this huge gradient that, like, the more education you have, the longer you live, right? It's a huge effect. And then you put on availability to new breakthrough technologies on top of that. It's going to amplify it. Of course, the hope would be, and is somehow in the nature of these technologies, that, like, not only the billionaires get an iPhone, right? I mean, rather there's a billion of them, right? And nobody had expected that these sophisticated iPhones could be in the hands of billions, right? So I think there's a lot of tendency in the tech world that actually want intrinsically to spread this to as many people as possible, because that's just the nature of the game.
Yeah.
So there is that danger.
In the interest of responsibility, other forms of handheld communication devices are also available. Just
even an Android. Yeah. So I think there's countervailing force here, because and of course in Asia it's they are more advanced than we are, right? Like it's not even that it's only in the West and so on, and even adoption in some cases has been also faster in Africa. So it has to be put in the right direction. I'm more afraid of patents and legal restrictions than I am that Google or Alibaba, whoever, want to keep it only to the billionaires in their societies. That I'm not so worried about that.
We're coming back, Jennifer, to hold you responsible for all the problems. Ollie, you had your hand up, I think.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add to that. I think I completely agree with Matthias. I mean, the technology in a way is more globally accessible, or it's easier to make them globally accessible than many other technologies. Let's put it that way. I think the likelihood that a machine or an algorithm, let's say, that can impute specific molecular outputs from DNA sequences used in Africa is higher than them getting access to the latest proteomics machine. So in a way, it can also have a positive effect that digital innovations are easier to translate, they're easier to ship. You can also, replicate things easier than, for example, complicated molecular biology technology or experimentation. So I think, on the one hand, across countries, I think that'll be easier. What on the counteract, where we see trends, and that's very interesting, is this relationship between academic research and industry, right? That basically you need in order to, one element is to access these technologies once they're there. I think these are very easy to democratize. But the second one is to actually create new technologies. And for that, you need a massive resources, both intellectually, engineering, compute capacity. And there we see an interesting shift, which might be also a topic, that academia can't do all aspects of innovation naturally. And there's an industrial component, and maybe the way the interplay works between industrial research and academic research is changing. I think there I see more culture shocks than the West monopolizing AI for its own purposes.
Yeah, excellent point. Matthias, I think you wanted to come back with...
just a specific context, because I very much agree with that. And also people have said, how could it be that that it took DeepMind, had no expertise whatsoever in structural biology, and they sort of solved the problem. Not everybody thinks it's solved, but I think it's sort of solved it to a large degree, and they come totally from outside, right? So, whereas we've been in the field, Chris has made huge advances there, and they couldn't have done it without his work. But still, I think we can learn in academia something of that focus that like Silicon Valley companies have, right? Like, for instance, in cancer, right? We're making not enough advances in cancer, and maybe it takes a bit more of that mindset that the tech companies have to make more progress. I mean, you need both, but I think we have too much of this puttering, which is fine for very basic research, but it's not fine for solving the major societal challenge. Also, we saw that in COVID as well.
Yeah, no, I think these are excellent points. And I'm going to bring Chris in just 1 second. I mean, I think you also made a good point that I think will resonate here. I remember it was, I think, attributed to Isaac Newton saying, "If I've seen further, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants." And I think that it would be not a great solution if we simply devolved to some big corporations able to add an extra layer on top of a huge amount of public funded basic research that's open access and available.
But if I can just cut in there, so yeah. I think there's also a misconception. So within these huge companies, it's always very small teams, right? I mean, that's one of the things Silicon Valley has learned. Never make a big team, right? Always you have, I mean, altogether they are huge and they have this infrastructure, but the advances always come from very small teams that we could easily have in academia too, like 10 people.
No, I think that's a good point, Matthias, to point out. I guess I was just thinking, apologies, Chris, I'll just give me 1 sec. I see some similarities here. I would really like to see if people agree with remembering back, Matthias, 30 years ago when we were in Heidelberg at EMBL, and I remember it came very close to the point with human genome sequences, where these were all going to be owned by Craig Venter's Genetics Research Institute. And I think a small number of key individuals played a catalytic role in preventing that happening. And it could very easily have gone the other way, that we have a very different situation. We take for granted that these sequences are all available. And so, I think we should be passionate about advocating the importance of basic science and shared facilities. Sorry, Chris, I've kept you waiting. Please come in. Hey, can you unmute, Chris?
Yeah, thanks very much. I just want to make a brief comment about something that I think is sort of a missing piece in the discussions about artificial intelligence and society and impact on humanity. And it was triggered actually by the comment that Matthias made talking about Android phones, which is that, in some sense, you have the AI systems and they're gradually rising and becoming perhaps independent. And there's some kind of a distribution of brains, but you have humanity as a collective brain. And this used to be not so much the case. It was level of families and tribes and maybe nations, but now the whole globe is connected. And you have a flow of information that's facilitated by these Android phones and rapidly spreading. And you actually see some movements like the Friday climate change movement and so on, that's rapidly, or even the Arab Spring, that's rapidly percolating. Now, the opportunity is that there's a new collective consciousness in humanity, and humanity as a whole has a collective brain. Culture, if you will, is an aspect of a collective human brain, but that's going to amplify by orders of magnitude through modern ways of communicating. Now, the good news is that's happening. The risk is that goes off in the wrong direction, and we see many ways in which it's going off in the wrong direction. So I think as scientists, we have a challenge to think about and contribute to human culture, the collective human brain, in a way that is much more important in some sense than the latest AI in robots, perhaps. I just want to put that on the map as something that we really should be concerned about as politically aware scientists and contribute to cultural education, science education. How do we get the whole world to take that on board, not just the 2%?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's one of the missions for the Alumni Society YouTube channel to take that mission forward. So perhaps, Thomas, you could wrap things up for us.
Yeah, so I mean, I was taken aback by what Matthias said with the omniverse and then describing and reconstructing the complexity of a tumor into a sort of digitalized form that is much more precise and more complex, like Oliver was saying. And to underline Chris' words, this was striking to me because, I mean, we all read about, Facebook or Meta, you want to call it, now creating or trying to push for what they call a multiverse, right? So a sort of recreation of life in their views that happens into the computer, into the environment that Facebook basically uses to sell something. So I think this is to underline Chris's word that, I mean, we have a big responsibility because I think the battlefield is not even at all. I mean, here you have, big teams and big money going for that, and then small teams like the AlphaFold teams or Matthias teams or our teams that have to push to do this and allow the machine to become, to be able to read this data, to reason on the data and stuff like that. But, pushing for what we think is progress, what we think is, more knowledge, what we think is healthcare for people. So I think it's quite a battle. It's going to be, but the field is not really level.
Yeah, fantastic point. 90 minutes have flashed past. Once again, we've come to the end of the time that's available. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think it's clear how rich and exciting and challenging an opportunity for all of us is presented by AI, how it's impacting so many different fields of science, healthcare, and also forcing us to think in a new way about some things that will deeply affect the laws that we make. And I think indeed we're coming to a strong conclusion. I don't think we came to a complete conclusion. Maybe Peter or Mish can correct me about whether AlphaFold we think should get a Nobel Prize. It was partly a fun question to start with, but I think there's a much clearer consensus around the idea that it is our responsibility to contribute knowledge and provide a data-driven, unbiased, factual description of reality to our friends in society and fellow citizens around the world. And I think that's a mission that we can all really contribute to, and we intend to take that forward. I'd just like, in conclusion, again, to thank everybody who came today. The chat has been fantastic. Please go and check it out again online or have a look at some of the discussion. There's some great links to online material. Absolutely fantastic. That's what Coffee with EMBL is all about. I think there's a lot more to discuss and learn about in this arena. I'm very grateful to all the panel who discussed with us and led the information about AI today and about the law. So thank you very much, Matthias, Ollie, Jennifer, and Alex, and everybody else who contributed and who came and listened. So thanks, everyone. Sincerely, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you back at future Coffee with EMBL. Thank you very much.